So today is the 12th day of Kislev, December 6th, and we're continuing with our discussion of Parashat Vayishlach. And Vayishlach is the parsha in which Jacob meets Esau again, Jacob and Esau. And we were discussing that on Sunday, the first installment, that this is understood in the Jewish tradition as being a symbol for the meeting of Judaism and Christianity. And before we
say that, or that's what you assume?
No, it means many things. It's not just that. Esau is also considered to be the meeting with the material aspect of this world. So it could be entirely within one person. It can be meaning within one individual that has a spiritual side and a physical side. Like we said, the Zohar takes it to be the evil inclination and the good inclination. It can go further into the relationship between the spiritual side within Judaism and meaning the people who are more connected to spirituality in the sense that they're scholars of Torah or they're authorities in Torah and so on, and the people who are engaged in day-to-day life, who know much less. They still have a duty to learn the entire Torah, but they don't, or they learn it to the best of their abilities. And then it can be the meeting between Judaism itself and the material aspect of the world, not even discussing yet anyone else in the world. And then finally it can be the meeting between Jacob and Esau, exactly as they became. That Jacob was a progenitor of the Jewish people, and Esau became the progenitor of Christianity. There's a difference between the two because Judaism is a people, it's a nation, and Christianity is not. It's just a creed, as we would say. But the Rebbe specifically talked about the meeting with all these aspects. He spoke about all of them. And he actually described it also in the beginning of the Dvar Malchut, the talk that he gave in 57-52, meaning 1992. Actually, it was 1991 then. He spoke about the sun and the moon, first of all, and the size of the sun and the moon, and all that's related to that. We're not going to get, that's the first part of his talk then. But what we want to focus on is the relationship between Judaism and Christianity, because that's the thing that he felt was most relevant and was changing the most. And again, didn't mean it as Christianity as specifically whether a person believes A, B, C, or D, whether he belongs to this church or that church. He wasn't discussing it that way. He was discussing it in the sense that there's always been a offshoot of Isaac's and Rebecca's house that became something that was adverse to Judaism. Right? That's what happened to Esau. And Jacob was trying to mend that relationship, was trying to fix it. So before even getting to that, I've told you the story a number of times about the Rebbe and this little girl who he met at the bus stop every day, and he talked to her a few minutes. Like maybe like 2 sentences, not a few minutes. But one time she told him, Mister, she didn't know who he was. She wasn't observant also. They just lived there in Crown Heights near the Rebbe. This is in the 50s. It could be that it's even before the Rebbe became the Rebbe. It could be that it's in the late 40s also. But I need to check the years if it makes sense, because I don't remember when it could have been. So it might be that this is already even in the late 50s. It's not so clear. I have to do the research a little bit better. And I told you the story that the story was going around that this girl asked him what he recommended. She needed to do a book report, and there were 2 authors that she had to select between. And I think she said Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov. Now, Asimov was a relation of the Rebbe's. He was a second cousin. He obviously wasn't observant, and he was also a very creepy guy. This I know from people who lived in this building in Manhattan. He was different. There's no question, and he wasn't observant in any external way. His doctorate was in chemistry, and he was a great science fiction author. But he wrote mostly non-fiction books. But he's known for his fiction books, science fiction. And the Rebbe told her that he advised her that she should take Asimov, and specifically he pointed her at the Foundation series. Now that's another giveaway, because I don't know when it became a series. Like, it was syndicated in the 40s, I'm almost sure, but I'm not sure when it became like a series of books. In any case, this was a story that was going around for a long time in Chabad, and I thought it had tremendous meaning, and I'll tell you in a moment why. We've never discussed why I thought this had a lot of meaning. I think I've told you the story. And then the story came out maybe 10 or 12 years ago, and I've been looking for the article ever since. I thought I saved it, but I can't find it. That eventually two Bochrim, two young fellows who were learning in the Chabad Yeshiva in Crown Heights, through a series of different connections, they came across this woman that needed burial. And there was no one in the family to take care of it. They didn't know what it meant, and they wanted to give her a Jewish burial, and this and that. And from they became close to the family, and they talked to them, and they said, you know why we came to you? So they say no. So because our grandmother, this is already the grandchildren, our grandmother spoke many times about the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And she told this story about her standing at the bus stop when she was 12 or 13 or 14 years old, and this man coming, and only years later she understood that man who had talked to her was the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And they told the story over again, that she was telling them that he had suggested to her to read Isaac Asimov, The Foundation. Why is this so important? I suspect that you haven't read the Foundation series. Okay? Now, I read it probably when I was in my teens, so we're talking about the early 80s, like mid-80s. And it right away it ringed very familiar, but at the time I couldn't put my finger on it. Like, why is this so? Why does it grab me so strongly? And it took me years to figure out that Asimov was telling the story of Judaism in a science fiction setting. Right? It's a very interesting thing. And what he says is, like, the backdrop is that there's a galactic empire, and it's about to fall apart. And there's this one man who can see that it's about to fall apart. His name is Harry Seldon. And I don't know enough Russian or whatever to get the allusions. There's probably allusions in there in the names and other things. But or maybe it's even Latin, and I don't get it. But in any case, this man he's a mathematician, and he can use math to predict the future. He sees the future, as it were. So he sees that if the Galactic Empire falls apart and there's nothing to replace it, and there can't be anything for a while, the period of chaos will last 10,000 years. But he also sees, through his equations and his research, that if he builds something called a foundation that will seemingly preserve society, preserve civilization, preserve knowledge, preserve science, preserve art, and so on, so that the period of time can be condensed to 1,000 years. And so then the whole series of books is basically about his setting up this foundation, and that they're supposed to somehow, they see themselves as very unique and talented, and he takes the best engineers, and they're a whole like group of the best minds in the galaxy, as it were, and they set up on this remote planet their foundation. And they go through all these adventures and things, and on their way to becoming the second galactic empire. What they always knew is that there's a second foundation at the other end of the galaxy. He said this himself. And they thought it was redundancy, but they had never met them, and they didn't know who they were. But he told them at the other end of the galaxy, so they thought they were on the other side. And they're living on a planet. They chose a planet that's very remote and has an indigenous population, what they think is an indigenous population, that is very backwards. They don't use technology. They seem to be simple farmers. They don't know very much. And to make the long story short, what Asimov was describing was that both Christianity and Judaism are trying to preserve civilization, except that what Christianity doesn't realize is that it is the external foundation, the one that people know about. And the real foundation, the second foundation, is Judaism. It's these simple farmers, these people that don't look like they know anything. And they're actually the ones who are making the history move. In fact, there are all these appearances of Harry Seldon, as it were, 200, 300, 400 years later, like in this special chamber where he's supposedly recorded himself, explaining to them what their next move needs to be and how they need to do things. As it turns out, in the final book in the series, there were 3 originally, called Second Foundation, is that this was being manipulated by the simple farmers, who actually turn out to be people who understand Seldon's mathematics, and they're constantly working on the equations. Now that already is that giveaway, right? Because everyone's working on the external part, and they're working on the internal part. And the internal part is much more complex. It's the brains behind the whole operation. And in that sense, this whole story is really a way to try to explain, look, there's a lot of important things that you're doing technically, technologically, in terms of the external aspect of reality, politically, and so on. But the real brains behind the operation is the people that you think that they don't know anything at all. And those people, they're actually, and they're like the Jews. They're very simple. You don't think they're anything special. And that was his way to try to convey that what we do with the Torah, that's really the brains behind the operation. So we were talking about in the first day about Yaakov sending only the external aspect of the angels, and not the internal aspect, the mamashut, the external aspect of them. What does that mean? That the people who connected to Judaism from the outside, like Esau, and everything he represents, everything that came after that, they only see the technical side of what Judaism is supposed to achieve, what the Torah is supposed to achieve. But they don't have the inner workings. If you don't have Talmud, if you don't have the rabbinic tradition, then in the end you're only working on the external, and you don't understand the inner message. And so Yaakov then sends only messengers that are the external aspect. But the Rebbe, as we'll read tomorrow, because we don't have time today to start this, the Rebbe says that was because at the time Esau was not ready. He wasn't ready yet. He wasn't ready yet to understand the inner message, right? Interestingly, before this, the Rebbe talked about the 7 mitzvos of the Noachide laws, what they call the 7 Noachide laws, which are really a whole group of commandments, but they're based on the 7 Noachide laws. And he made a big he made a big deal about that the world is now ready to hear about the commandments. That there are commandments, that God wants something from the entire world, not just from Jews. But from the moment that he starts talking about that Esau is now ready, and this is what we'll see tomorrow, that in 1991 he began to say that the situation today is different than it was in the time of Jacob and Esau. At that time you could only send the external aspect. Now Esau is ready, the world is ready, and we have to give the internal aspect. It's not enough to just give the external. It's not enough to just give them the commandments. They also have to understand the message behind it all. What's the message behind it all? The message behind it all is what we call Mashiach. But what they understood Mashiach to be until now is a very external aspect of what Mashiach really is. They haven't, because they see it from the external side. They're like the first foundation. They think they're preserving civilization by keeping all these relics from the past. But in the end, because they don't have the living connection to God, so it's it's almost like something frozen in time. It's not something alive. To have the living connection, to have what this thing called Mashiach is, which Mashiach's role is to connect us to God, for that you have to have the inner workings of the Torah. You have to be able to learn Torah. And you have to be part of the second foundation. So eventually the first and second foundation meet in this book also. And they save the day. What do they save the day from? From the guy called the Mule. It's very interesting. The Mule, whether they like it or not, and he was very, very smart, he is able to change people's behavior without changing their understanding. So he was a manipulator. He was able to manipulate people's minds. So it says the Mule, he was going to create a second galactic empire even faster than everyone else. And it, as it were, Selden could not have foreseen that it would be such a mutant who was able to control people's minds. But what Asimov is doing here is he's explaining, if you're only external, you're the mule. You're the mule. What's the mule? What's the symbol of the mule in Judaism? So he changed it a little. He couldn't call him a donkey because it wouldn't wouldn't work so well. So he calls him the mule. He says that's the price of being external. The price of being external is you can only change people's external habits, but you don't change their inner being. So they also don't understand, they can't connect to Torah, because Torah is about changing the inner aspect of who you are, and not just how you act. So we'll see more about this tomorrow when we start reading the Rebbe's Sicha on Vayishlach.